Discovery of the cell. Robert Hooke was a great scientist. He discovered the cells in 1665. He had designed a microscope himself. You can look at the picture of the microscope he had designed. He looked at the slice of cork through this microscope. What he found after looking at the cork, he discovered that the cork looked like the structure of a honeycomb. That is, the cork was some type relating to the structure of a honeycomb. He found that the cork was made up of a large number of tiny compartments or boxes, and each box was separated from the other by a wall or partition. You can see here that this is the cell structure of the cork, and you can see here that these are the small pores or compartments, and there is a wall in between each of these tiny compartments. He called these tiny compartments or boxes as cells. His observations are recorded in his book Micrographia. Next is cell theory. The credit for developing the cell theory is usually given to two scientists, Sladen and Schwann, while there is also the name of another scientist known as Virchow, who contributed to the cell theory, but he is not as credited for his stuff towards it. Now, there are three basic components of the cell theory. What are those basic components? First is, all living organisms are composed of one or more cells. Second basic component of cell theory is that the cell is the basic unit of life in all living organisms. And the third basic component of cell theory is that all cells arise from pre-existing cells. Now, a question arises, why cell is called the structural and functional unit of life? The word cell is derived from the Latin word cellula, which means a little room. All living organisms can be divided into two types, unicellular organisms and multicellular organisms. In case of unicellular organisms, they are also known as single celled organisms. That is, a single cell provides the structure for the body, and the single cell performs all the functions that take place inside the body of the organism. All these functions include digestion, excretion, etc. In the case of multicellular organisms, there are multiple cells in the body. And the examples of multicellular organisms are plants, animals, human beings. In the case of multicellular organisms, the number of cells vary from species to species. It is approximated that the human body contains trillions of cells. Sorry. In case of multicellular organisms, cells form the structure of the organism. You can see here that the cells form the structure of the organisms. A bunch of cells working together form the tissue, and a bunch of tissues working together form the organ, and a bunch of organs working together form the organ system, and the organ system further combines to form the organism. The examples of tissue is nervous tissue, example of organ is brain, example of organ system is organ nervous system. The cells in multicellular organisms vary in size and shape. depending upon the function they perform. All the functions which take place inside the body of the multicellular organisms, all these functions are performed by the cells. Now, the question arises, what are unicellular organisms? A unicellular organism is also known as single celled organisms. That is, there is only single cell present in a unicellular organism, and all the life processes such as reproduction, feeding, digestion, excretion occur in one cell only. There are some examples of unicellular organisms which are bacteria, protozoa, amoebas, unicellular fungi, etc. Amoeba has no definite shape. It keeps on changing its shape. A white blood cell which is present in the human body is another example of a single cell which can change its shape. So we observe that amoeba can change its shape, and at the same time a white blood cell which is present in the human body can also change its shape. But it does not mean that WBC, that is white blood cell, is also a unicellular organism. White blood cell defends the body against infection and disease. But while WBC is a cell, amoeba is a full-fledged organism which is capable of independent existence. Now, multicellular organisms. You here can see the photographs of beautiful multicellular organisms. These are the four pictures of different multicellular organisms. Multi means many, cellular means cells. It means that there are many cells present in the multicellular organisms. All the species of animals, land plants, and most fungi are multicellular. Now the question arises, how many cells are present in a multicellular organisms? The number of cells which are present in the multicellular organisms may range from a few to many billions. The number of cells being less in smaller organisms does not mean that it affects the functioning of the organisms. All the cells which are present in the multicellular organisms work in coordination with one another for the proper functioning of the organism. It is to be noted that the lifespan of a unicellular organism is short because all the functions inside the body of the unicellular organism, that is excretion, digestion, etc., place within this single cell. So there is heavy workload on the cell. Due to this reason, the span of a single celled organism is short, whereas on the other side, the lifespan of multicellular organisms is longer because the different cells carry out specific functions. Now we will find out the difference between unicellular and multicellular organisms. First is number of cells. As we have discussed earlier, uni means one, cellular means cells. In case of unicellular organisms, organism consists of a single cell. Whereas in the case of multicellular organisms, as we have already told, there are multiple cells in a multicellular organisms which may range from a few to billions of cells. The next point is size. The size of the cell in the case of unicellular organisms is somewhat larger as compared to the cells in a multicellular organisms. Whereas in the case of multicellular organisms, the size of the cell is smaller. Now, the next point is functions. As the unicellular organism has a single cell in its body, all the functions which are necessary for the functions of the life, such as eating, reproduction, waste removal, moving, etc., are performed by the single cell. Whereas in the case of multicellular organisms, specialized cells perform different life functions. For example, nerve cells. Next is type of role. Cell has only one role, that is as an individual. In the case of multicellular organism, cell has dual role, as an individual and as well as part of the community. Now, next point is workload. Workload in the case of unicellular organisms, workload on the cell is high because all the functions have to be performed by the single cell. But in the case of multiple cellular organisms, there are multiple cells present. So the workload on the individual cell is very less. Next point is division of labor. As there is only single cell present in the unicellular organism, no division of labor is there. Whereas in the case of multicellular organisms, there are a large number of cells present in the organisms and different cells perform different functions. So division of labor is there in case of multicellular organisms. Next point is survival capacity. Death of the cell results into the death of the organism because it is the single cell which is present in the unicellular organisms. Whereas in the case of multicellular organisms, death of a few cells does not result into the death of the organism. Next point is cell replacement. There is no cell replacement, whereas in the case of multicellular organisms, old and weak cells are continuously replaced by the new cells. Examples of unicellular organisms are bacteria, amoeba, yeast, etc. Whereas in the case of multicellular organism, examples are some fungi, animals and plants. Thanks for watching. If you like our course, please spare some time to give a star rating to our course.